Chapter 11 isn't exactly a long chapter, but it does hit on many important things for you to understand with how what you can expect from the information systems department and its management therein. So what we're going to talk about today is what are the functions and organization of the IS department. So you get a bit of an idea of what's actually going on inside of the IS field. So if you do need to communicate with people within the department, you'll realize that there are a number of different functions that are very specialized. And so if you have questions or concerns or working with people, you have a bit of context for that conversation. I also want to talk about how do organizations plan the use of information systems, particularly the resources within the information systems department. What are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing? So you hear a lot about outsourcing. When is it useful? When is it not? And how do we know? And lastly, I want to talk about what are your rights and responsibilities as a user. All right, so let's talk about first what are the functions and organization of information systems department. Now, there's a lot of little things we could talk about here. Specifically, the functions, I think that some of these are pretty obvious, but one, we want to plan how to use information systems to accomplish the organizational goals and strategy. Now, we've talked a lot about this, so this should be a fairly obvious one at this point. But two, we want to outsource, manage the outsourcing relationships. And there's a lot of different ways this can occur. So how we outsource is a very big question when it comes to information. And by outsourcing, we're specifically focusing on information systems outsourcing or our development of information systems. You can outsource other parts of your organization, such as HR or even your logistics. And while the information systems department may help with that, that is not their primary function. The IS department needs to be able to protect the information assets. And there's a whole discussion on security, especially when we're going to get into chapter 12. We're going to talk a lot about security. But it's very important for the IS department to do that and to do it well. Fourth, the IS department is to develop, operate, and maintain all those computing infrastructure for the company. So there's a lot of stuff that's being developed and housed by the IS department. Their role is to make sure it continues and stays operational. And lastly, not just the computing infrastructure, which includes the computers and hardwares and printers and networks, but they also have to do the software. So then they maintain the enterprise applications. And so there's a ton of stuff they do. And you might even throw in there the data. They have to develop, operate, and maintain the data for the enterprise. So, so nothing here is actually revolutionary in what you might have expected from this. But what we want to do is then talk a little bit about how is this actually done. So how is the IS department organized? Now today, let me back up a minute. The information systems department originated in accounting and finance. 9 times out of 10, this is where the IS started from, because that is where it was most useful in developing accounting and finance applications and helping to automate those departments. And you can still find that in a lot of organizations, that a chief information officer or an IS director reports directly to the chief financial officer. That is not at all uncommon. However, that was the old way. Now many businesses, not all, but many have moved the chief information officer to report directly to the chief executive officer. And their responsibility is often to align the IS with the organizational strategy. Okay, so they need to be involved with the strategic discussions because of the integral nature of information to the business. Right? It is such an important asset. But underneath your chief information officer or the whoever the top IS person is, you're going to have somebody who deals or manages the technology. You're going to have somebody who deals with the operations, and when by operations I mean the computing infrastructure and responding to user problems. You need people who can do development of new things and new technologies, of creating new information systems. And you need to manage the outsourcing relationships if you have any. And then lastly, you need to have people who can manage or administrate the data. So these are kind of the common areas within the information system. Now, it's important, though, before I go on, is to emphasize this is going to be different at every single company. They all have their variations on this theme. For example, there might be a web group that's separate from everything else that's going on, but still reports to the chief information officer. You might have a very centralized IS department or a very decentralized department, such that each department there might be a series of these groups at various different locations or working with various different parts of the company. So there might be someone working with marketing, somebody working with manufacturing and logistics, someone might working with the finance. So again, I want to emphasize that this is very highly dependent upon the business culture and what was developed over time, and can oftentimes be very different. Now, that being said, there are specific jobs that are very, very common across all industries. So I want to talk a little bit about these, because as your role and as a user going into organizations, you're going to have to work with many of these people. And if you want to have a clue of what the heck they're even doing, you got to have a clue about what these jobs often entail. So I didn't really like the way the book broke it down, so I kind of developed this little chart here to kind of help with the discussion. It's not 100% accurate or as perfect as I would like it to be, but it should be a good starting point. So they list all these jobs in the book, and we'll go through them a little bit in detail, but do realize that a lot of the job positions often follow the categories we already talked about, the components of information system from hardware. And so there's people that work specifically with the hardware, whether it's the actual computer server or the someone who puts who will install a microphone for you, or new speakers, or a new printer. You have network administrators who have to actually lay down cables or deal with network bandwidth issues. So there are jobs that are very, very hardware specific. Then there's jobs that are very software specific, like your programmers or software engineers or your testers. Then you have data related positions, such as your database administrator. And that's actually what my dad did for a number of years. He was a database administrator. And then probably one of the more new type positions developing something called a data analyst, who works with big data, and we've talked about that a little bit, to create business intelligence, right? So these people are very data focused. And then you have, and just probably for a lack of a better place to stick this role, but a systems analyst, who will probably be best described not necessarily as procedures, but they have to understand the business processes in its entirety in order to, I like to think of it, and this is kind of the role that our department, we train people to be systems analysts. And as I like to explain to people, what does a system analyst do? They're essentially an interpreter. They interpret between the business users and the programmers and all the hardware and software and data guys. The systems analyst works as kind of this go-between between the business and the techie side, right? So probably procedures is not the best place to stick these guys, but they do have to understand all the different procedures that are involved with this communication process. And you can include like project managers and kind of in that category too. Although a good project manager won't necessarily have to be an expert in technology. A systems analyst has to kind of bridge both the understanding of technology and the understanding of the business process. And that's very, very difficult to do. But more importantly, they essentially become that go-between, because the business users, they can't talk to the programmers because the programmers have a completely different set of language and expectations and way of describing things than a business person will. And so sometimes a business person says, well, this software has to be able to do this. And the programmer will say, well, it can't do that. That's not allowed. And they're not talking to each other. Well, what the business person might mean is it has to have this, is I have to have this specific answer or result in a report. But what the computer person is hearing is I have to have everything in totality. And so the communication can often be disjointed because they don't really understand each other. There's nothing bad against the business user or the programmer. They're both very competent in what they do. They just can't talk to each other. Right? And I've seen this before, and have, people with computer programming degrees, and they're wickedly good at programming, but they just don't understand the business side of things. So that's where a systems analyst comes in, right? And their job primarily is to accurately capture what is necessary for the business and design systems that will help solve those problems or make them more efficient or effective. Right. So, and you also have, people like technical writers. Now, a technical writer, he has to know some technology, but it has to be really good at writing. So these are people that write documentation, or they might, we'll talk a little bit more about it, but their role is to write things in a very technical format. You might also have someone who's a security specialist. Now, security does go more than just procedures, because you have to deal with software security, and there might be even hardware that they have to deal with. But what they primarily focus on, though, is the procedures necessary to keep your information safe. But then you can also have roles, and this is even within the information systems department, that focus on things like user support or a salesperson who, again, is working a lot with the people. It doesn't mean they don't have to know the rest of it, but they do have to know at least the basics. Right? And then there's job positions that kind of span all five of these, like a consultant. Now, not all consultants do this. Some consultants specialize in, there might be a consultant in software development or a consultant in data administration. But many consultants actually have to have a very broad understanding of what's going on. And a systems architect you might consider them to be kind of one of your top engineers for your information systems. So they have to be able to understand hardware, software, data, procedures, people, and how they all fit together in order to architect systems, especially larger information systems, and put all those pieces together. Now, sometimes systems analysts go into systems architect role, or sometimes senior programmers go into the systems architect role. Sometimes even network administrators can move up there. But the idea is you eventually see the big picture of how all the different components fit together. And then at the top of the IS department is something called a CIO or CTO, the Chief Information Officer or the Chief Technology Officer. Now, the book does a really poor job of differentiating between the two. They take a they assume that the chief technology officer often or usually reports to the chief information officer, and that's simply not true. There's a lot of organizations where the chief technology officer is either equal to or in place of a chief information officer. And I even have it's my cousin's husband was a chief technology officer of this company called Square. And I don't know, you may have seen an ad for this before. It's a little credit card reader that you can plug into your cell phone. And basically you can swipe credit cards with this little device. Well, the guy, Bob Lee, he just recently left, the chief technology officer at the company Square. And his role was to do a lot of the same things you might think a chief information officer does. Now, the chief technology officer might also be a bit more of a technology futurist, thinking about looking at the technology coming down the road and seeing how it fits within the organization. But that isn't always true. Sometimes they do a much more operational role where they're actually managing the operations. And so it can vary quite a bit from one organization to the next as to the role of the chief information officer and the role of the chief technology officer. Some organizations have both. Some of them have them at the same level. Some of them have one reporting to the other. Some of them will only have a CIO. Some will only have a CTO. So there's a lot, again, I want to focus, there's a lot of different variations, but generally speaking, people do specialize a lot, especially when they're getting started in the industry. And then as they develop, they have to learn more and more about how these pieces interrelate until they get to a level where they're, in a senior level staff, where they have to see more of the big picture. So what does this mean? Well, and honestly, what I really love about this field that I'm in, and I chose management information systems as a field because I actually love this idea of understanding both the business side and the technology side and using technology to solve business problems. And to me, that was just a very cool concept. So, and I had done programming and web programming. I was a web developer and moved more into, I did some back-end programming. I actually had to manage databases. I did some network administration. So I've done a number of these jobs, even user support. But what I loved most was when I was working as a systems analyst. That part of the job really, really appealed to me. Now, today, I can say quite confidently that the people we're graduating from our program are averaging starting salary. So this salary range in here is probably a little on the high end, probably more appropriate for cities like San Francisco or New York or Boston. For here, our graduates, systems analysts, are graduating making $50,000 a year. All right, and how does that sound to you, right? So that's the average. We have people that have started making $60,000 and $70,000 a year. But this is actually very, very typical, right? And I'll let you read through these responsibilities and the knowledge, skills, and requirements to get the job done. One thing I do want to point out, especially for like a systems analyst, is the knowledge and skills. What do you need? Strong interpersonal and communication skills. That above everything else. So even if you're, that's what people think. Information systems is all about the technology. You're going to be in a cubicle all day. No. That's not what a systems analyst does, and that's not what our program does. Although you have to know the technology, and yes, you have to know the business, but you spend most of your time talking to people. All right, you have programmers, and good programmers can make a lot of money, and they can be in very high demand. Now, yes, a number of programming jobs have been outsourced, probably more the lower end ones. But good quality programmers are still in demand in a lot of businesses today. Testers. Now, we've had some of our MIS graduates actually go into quality assurance, basically as test engineers. And I know one guy at Fidelity is doing that and doing it quite well and making some nice bank in the process. But what's interesting about being a good tester is that your job is to try to break it. Your job is to try to break the software that's being developed. Now, it seems kind of fun, right? So your job is to come up with as many crazy ways as you can to break any new system. So it's kind of fun in that regard. Technical writers, and I don't know if we've had many of our graduates go into technical writing, because you have to, it's not that they don't have the capabilities to do it, it's just a little bit more of a difficult transition, I would say. I don't know if a lot of them are hiring out of that. I think you could probably have better luck with a degree in English to become a technical writer. But we also do place a number of people in user support. So you have to deal with people calling up saying, "Hey, my computer's not working. Can you help me through it?" Some of these roles don't start off paying a whole lot of money, but eventually there are some high-end user support roles that do have a fairly decent, what's the word I'm looking for? A fairly decent pay from it. Computer technicians, and this is, if you know how to install software or repair computer equipment, it's pretty easy to learn the very base of this. This is not exactly what we place people in. In fact, you could probably become a computer technician with this, an associate degree and a couple certificates. Doesn't pay nearly as much though. So it's a great place for some people to start getting into computer industry, or particularly as a college job. Less likely, but we have occasionally placed people as network administrators. Now, usually they come out of, there's a college of technology that has a specific program for training network administrators. High-end network administrators can not only make six figures, but can sometimes top over 200,000, especially if you get into security. Now, security isn't all about network administration, and you'll see that when we get to Chapter 12. But, and I don't know, they may have lumped security people into this group, because security really does branch multiple different areas. But security today is such a huge thing because, there's not, I would not say that there's, billions of hackers out there, but there's enough that keep causing problems that we need to keep upping the game in security to keep out the bad guys, right? So it's not going away. In fact, it's increasingly important for large organizations to have good security people. And we do have, we've graduated some people from our program that have gone in security, and they're making a ton of money, but they get some certifications and they work hard, but they do some really incredible stuff. Now, another way you can get into industry is go race straight into consultancy. And there's a lot of different consulting companies, especially if you head out to the Raleigh area. But a lot of these consultants, they can specialize, but they can also, and I've talked to a few consultants that were told when they went to start working, they would be given, thrown into a project and said, "Here, learn how to program on a mainframe." I'm like, what? I don't know anything about mainframes. So where are you going to learn it? And they do that. They'll throw you into all different types of things, and you learn all different types of skills. But eventually you develop some really high quality knowledge about how information systems work. In particular, knowledge and how it depends on that work. Some people go into sales, but good salesmen can make some good money too. Some small scale project managers, some large scale project managers, database administrators. And then as you continue up and managing the business, there's even something called a portfolio manager or a program manager, which is basically a manager who manages project managers. And those at the high end are especially for big businesses. Now, I had a friend of mine who actually became a program manager he started at AG Edwards. It got bought out by Wachovia, which got bought out by Wells Fargo. So by the time he left, it was Wells Fargo. But he was a program manager. He became a program manager at one point, where he was in charge of transitioning their information systems to a web-based system. And so there were multiple different sub-projects that he was responsible for. And these sub-projects each had a project manager. But if you continue down that road, eventually you get more and more management experience, and you get to see bigger and bigger capabilities or the integration of all these things, and hopefully develop a better appreciation for strategy of the entire organization. And so at the very top level, this is where you need to not only understand all the technology, but you have to understand the business. And in particular, you need to understand the organizational strategy. And so I already talked a little bit about how these definitions of CTO and CIO vary by business. So don't think this is hard and fast rules here. But the important thing is you have to be a good manager. You have to have a good strategic thinker, good communicator. And you have to, again, balance the needs of the business with the needs of the technology. So once you have all this, what can you do? Well, how do organizations plan the use of information systems? Well, number one, and this was talked about much earlier in the book, you need to align information systems with the organizational strategy. So the IS capabilities and the organizational strategy is that maintaining that alignment is a continual process, because the technology keeps changing, because the strategy adjusts over time. And without a strong chief information officer, the information systems can oftentimes be seen as a drag on the organization's opportunities. Like the organization can't move because the information system's preventing it. And so that gets into the second part, which is being effective at communicating not only information systems issues, and I think the book stops here when they should have gone on and said also the opportunities of information systems to the executive group. And too often, and I think this is kind of a pattern I've seen throughout the book, is that it talks about information systems as if it has to be top down. But as they talked about with a chief technology officer, sometimes you need to look at how technology can enable new strategy. So for example, you might currently have a process for getting rid of out-of-date or old products that are no longer being sold, right? So, every year you might come out with a new model or new version of your product. What do you do with all the old stuff that didn't sell? Well, you may have had a process where you sent it to secondhand retailers or something. But suppose online auctions develop. Well, you can use those online auctions instead of your traditional method of selling that old stuff, right? And so by understanding how this new technology can provide an opportunity and communicating that opportunity effectively to the executive group can give you the ability to really change your business and give you a competitive advantage. So you might be able to sell this old stuff at a much greater price, giving you and your business more profits. In fact, many successful businesses now will actually, and if you read Clay Christensen came up with a couple of books called The Innovator's Dilemma and Innovator's Solution. Innovator's Solution, about how a lot of businesses basically find themselves in a position where they continue doing what they're doing, but they're not looking for ways to leapfrog and basically put their traditional business model out of business with a new business model. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go read his books, because they're really, really interesting reads about strategy and how some businesses have found themselves very traditional, well-developed businesses that simply could not compete with new business models or new products that leapfrogged them and became far more effective. So understanding technology can do that for you, specifically new technologies that may at first seem only so-so, excuse me, but as they develop, they become very powerful techniques for really transforming an organizational strategy. So communicating those opportunities is important too. What else do they need to do? Well, they need to develop the priorities and enforce them within the information systems department. And so, for example, there's so many new technologies out there and so many opportunities that a business could pursue, but you have to wean that down to just the few things that are the most important. Well, how do you know what's the most important? Well, you need to develop priorities and then enforce them within the information systems department. So how do you go about developing these priorities? And that is where a steering committee can come in to help. So a steering committee is essentially a group of senior managers in the organization. So from all the major business functions. And this doesn't mean you have to have just the vice president of marketing and the vice president of sales. It doesn't always have to be the very top person in a department, but one of the senior one of the senior managers who knows the department well, but can also give feedback and direction to the information systems to help set its priorities, decide among the major IS projects and alternatives, what are we going to do to move this organization forward. Now, the IS department sets up the steering committee's schedule and agenda and conducts the meetings, but it helps drive the information systems department. All right, so moving on. Let's talk about outsourcing. So basically, we've talked a lot about, having the IS department doing all the work. But you don't have to do that. You can have it where another organization can basically do all of your information systems. In fact, General Motors at one point outsourced its entire IS department. That's right, General Motors, the car company, outsourced their entire information systems department. They had, I believe at one point, 2 IS employees. That's right, 2. Okay? Because everybody else was outsourced. One of them was their CIO. The other was essentially their secretary. And that was it. All right. So why would a company do something like that? What are the advantages, but what are also the disadvantages of outsourcing? So outsourcing essentially is the process of hiring another organization to perform a service. Now, any value chain activity can be outsourced, from human resources to logistics to supply, part of which is part of your supply chain management, to even manufacturing. Companies like Apple, they actually outsource the manufacturing of their products, right? But essentially what happens, and this is a quote from Peter Drucker, the famous business strategy guru, but it says your back room is someone else's front room. So what the things that you do in the background is what they do in the front ground or in the front. So that's their primary focus. So why is that a good thing? In particular, why is it good for information systems? So management. So here's some advantages for the management. You instantly obtain expertise in areas that you may not already have, right? So if you outsource, especially if this outsourcing organization has a fairly large IT staff, they're going to have specific expertise that you may not have in your organization, especially if you're a smaller organization. So you get instant expertise, and it's their job to maintain that expertise, not yours. So you avoid some management problems because you don't have to deal with human resources and hiring people, firing people, keeping track of time. Well, you might do a little bit of that. All you have to do is pay for the hours that they're working for you. Now, the idea of free management time isn't exactly true because part of the contact time is incorporated with the management costs, but whatever, right? Now, this should ideally give you the ability to actually have a cost reduction, particularly if you're hiring people to develop projects, but these projects, once they're done, you don't need the services of those IT professionals anymore. And if you don't need their services, you don't want to keep them on as employees. So you hire them for short periods of time. Once that's done, they go on their merry way, and you have a system that works for you. And this also helps you to gain economies of scale, in that you can quickly scale things up with outsourcing some of the work to another organization, and they can do part of your development for you. You also have a reduced risk from things like capital financial exposure. You should have less risk from quality issues because you're hiring more experienced people. You also have a reduced implementation risk because now this project failing could mean a serious blow to your outsourced company and their ability. I mean, you can basically write it into the contract. Like if this implementation fails, you're going to be liable for XXXX. So they have a very high motivation to get things done and done well and right, which helps you avoid, a failure in the implementation. So many companies do outsource at least portions of their information systems activities. And a lot of times this is when they're bringing in a new piece of software. They'll hire consultants who will come in and help them set up and integrate the system, maybe even do some training for the internal employees so that they learn how it works. And so outsourcing, though, can be more than just people. You can also outsource, and we talked a little bit about cloud computing, but you can outsource all parts of the information systems process, including the infrastructure. So you remember IaaS, which stands for Infrastructure as a Service, a type of cloud computing, Platform as a Service, PaaS, Software as a Service, SaaS, right? So essentially, that's essentially what you do. You outsource the actual components of an information system so that someone else has to manage all that stuff, including manage the hardware, manage the software, manage the data, manage procedures. And one way to think of procedures, how do you outsource the procedures, hardware, software, data? As an analogy, and it's really not that far off, think of like a franchise, a business franchise, like McDonald's, right? You open a McDonald's, you're essentially purchasing the franchise or renting the franchise from McDonald's. Now, McDonald's actually buys the property, but you have to, and they provide the hardware, software, data, and procedures, and you rent it from them. All you have to do is hire the employees and train them, and so the people part you're responsible for, but the franchise, the rest of it, McDonald's is responsible for. So, but some major categories of alternatives according to information systems components and outsourcing of hardware to the cloud. You can, like EDS, which is a very big consulting company, has more than 30 years of experience as an outsourced vendor of hardware infrastructure. Software as a service, a typical one known today as is Salesforce.com. So anybody goes into sales, maybe even customer service might be familiar with that. The company I used to work for is a virtual communication services, and they have a software as a service called the VPMI, which stands for Virtual Project Management Intranet. It is, again, a software as a service. Or you can outsource an entire system. Like Oracle provides entire payroll functionality as an outsourced service. Pretty nice, right? So client companies only provides the employee and the work information while the payroll outsourced vendor does all the rest. So a web storefront is another form of outsourcing, right? So you can create an e-commerce company that sells products. So like, for example, Amazon.com, it provides the web storefront for product vendors and distributors who choose not to develop their own web presence. All you have to do is provide, you hire the people who can put the products up there and sell products. So there's a lot of options here. In fact, you can get to the point where you can outsource the entire business function, where your business is doing almost nothing. In fact, I even talked about this earlier. You could have an entire virtual business where you outsource all the business functions, and it's just you. And as long as the money that's going out is more than the money coming in, you're fine. You're golden. You're making money for doing next to nothing, right? Except organizing all the pieces and making it work together. Now, this all sounds rosy and all wonderful that you can outsource everything. There are problems with this, and I don't want to gloss over those. Number one, you lose a lot of control, right? So the vendor is the one who controls the technology. And so whatever they decide to do, they can do. It's their technology. You also have a potential loss of intellectual capital. Because if you've outsourced everything, or even some stuff, your employees aren't learning how to do that. And so their development is hampered because of that. You're subject to product fixes and enhancements that may not fix what you need. So yeah, you might start using a service and it ain't perfect, but it does 85% of what you need. And you're hoping they'll do this last 15% that you need over the next year, but they choose to spend their time and energy doing something else. So you don't have control over that. I mean, you can make suggestions, but if you're not one of their major customers, they don't care. You might find that your vendor management, direction, or identity, if they sell the company, changes. Another thing you need to ask are, do the benefits outweigh the long-term costs? So it might save you money in the short term, but then again, there are a lot of high unit costs that continue to go on forever. If you build something yourself, it's yours, the long-term costs go down. You also end up paying for someone else's mismanagement. Well, you pay for someone's management and mismanagement. If they screw up, you're still paying for it. And And in fact, in time, outsourced vendors is your de facto sole source. It can become a problem. And you may not get what you pay for, but you don't know it. Like, for example, maybe you're paying for a regular backup of your data. Well, they say they're doing it. How do you know they're still doing it? They may not, right? And this can also lead to a problem with changing vendors. You might become locked in where critical knowledge is in the minds of the vendors and not your employees. Or changing vendors is difficult because they have their own proprietary system. So it's expensive and risky. In fact, there's some industries where this is not an option. So like I've talked to some people in the insurance industry, and there are some things they would consider outsourcing, but a lot of it, the data for their business is mission critical to them, and they will not outsource it at all because they don't want anyone else to see this data or have access to it. So yes, there can be some major risks with outsourcing. All right. Now, last thing I want to talk about are you as a user. Now, again, I'm going to have to pile on the author of this book because I really don't like him referring to this as user rights. These are not rights, at least not in the political sense of the term of a right. At best, we should probably say these are your ideal expectations. If you're not getting this, I would strongly recommend that you either tell the company, fix this or I'm leaving, because honestly, I think that's what they should provide. And that's really how they should have worded it. What a company should provide, don't consider it a right. It's not a right. They can give you whatever the heck they want, and if it doesn't work, it's your job to do something about it, not go whining to somebody else and say, I'm not getting what I want. So, all right, don't be whiners. And I think this author here is setting you up to be one. So don't listen to him. Don't be a whiner. All right. So what should you expect? Let's say that. Well, computer hardware and programs that allow you to perform your job the way you need to do it, right? That, at the very basic, you would think should be provided for you. Sometimes it's not. So you have to deal with that however you can. But the word proficiently is a kind of a vague term because information systems are constantly being created and enhanced over time. So what might be proficient today may not be tomorrow. All right. You should also expect reliable network and internet connections, particularly today. Now, many companies now have gotten over this general fear of connecting their employees to the internet. There's still some companies where it's generally frowned upon. This might be more like in retail settings where the employees, especially the sales staff, need to be out on the floor doing work and not messing around on the internet. But for many businesses, though, especially information workers, they need access to information, and the best way to get that information is on the internet. Businesses in general know that they need to have a secure computing environment and will want to provide a secure computing environment for you, which includes protection from viruses, worms, and other threats. They're going to want you to contribute to requirements for new systems, features, and functions. You should expect to do that, to add and to help make the new system better. Again, don't be whiners when they have to change systems or when they want to change to something new. Instead, take an active role and say, hey, I want this system to rock for me, so I'm going to get involved with this to make this new information system do everything I need it to do so my job looks awesome. I come out smelling like roses to my boss because I have an information system that gets me all the information I need to do a great job. You should expect reliable systems development and maintenance. However, Be understanding if it does have problems. As we talked about in the systems development chapter in the project management section, it's not easy. And so to do systems development, but, work with them and try to help them be as good as they can be. You should also expect attention to problems, concerns, and complaints. Now, please understand that you're not always going to have all your problems and concerns and complaints dealt with to your satisfaction. Sometimes they'll just simply say, we hear you, we can't do anything about it right now. And that's part and parcel with information. So they have to prioritize things, right? So even if you have a problem, doesn't mean necessarily it's going to get fixed. And also understand that that's part of the prioritization for problems and resolutions. Now, you should also expect good training for software, but oftentimes, and especially as systems development becomes better and better, training is becoming less and less, or you'll find trainings embedded with the system itself. So you learn as you click on different things within the system, and they'll have little prompts that might help you understand what's going on. So, yes, you're going to have to participate in meetings to help gather requirements, but this is kind of, I would say, what good expectations for most companies will provide for you. Again, don't treat it as a right. It's not, but it's a good framework for understanding where you're going to fit in with information systems, particularly with the department and with your interaction with them. Now, your responsibilities. That's kind of the flip side. So this is what you should expect from them. Now, what can they expect from you? Well, number one, be sure you learn some basic computer skills. Now, most of you have done it, especially if you've taken this class, because I've required you to work with Excel and with Access and with PowerPoint, and you've already done that in a previous class too. So continue to keep using different technologies and learning them. These basic skills. Also learn standard techniques and procedures for applications you use. So start honing those skills within your industry, whatever you're working with. So if you're going in supply chain management, learn how to work with ERP. If you're going into marketing, learn how to use Salesforce automation tools. If you're going into human resources, learn how to use human resource software. All right. And now they get a little bit redundant here when they say follow security and backup procedures, which includes things like protecting passwords, using computers and mobile devices according to employers' computer use policies, make no unauthorized hardware modifications, and so on and so forth. So yeah, I know they're a bit repetitive in that. The basic idea is know what these the policies are at your employer's place for security and backup, and follow those policies. Now, that you do need to know this. Why? Because it is so freaking easy for people to leave information vulnerable. Most people don't even realize they're doing it. So understanding the basics of how you can protect not only your own information, but the company's information is very, very important. And also, when you're asked, and actually I would say volunteer if you're not asked, devote time, the time required to respond carefully and completely to requests for requirements for new systems, features, and functions, or interacting as testers, or with data model acceptance, whenever in the entire systems development process. That's what you can do. And that's what you should do when you go out there. All right? Don't expect hand-holding, but do your best to make your experience, to make the experience of everyone a positive, a value, a gain-gain, a win-win. All right. So, What did we talk about today? Well, we did look a little bit more into the information systems department. And there's a lot of really fascinating roles within that department. For me, I loved working in IT. And I don't do nearly as much of that now, in part because I love teaching even slightly more. So that's why I'm here teaching all this cool stuff. But within the information systems department, there are a lot of roles. So understand what different people are doing in an organization can help you interact with them. How do organizations plan the use of information systems? Well, they have a variety of different ways of doing this. And you saw a variety of different structures. But ideally what to do is they're trying to align the information systems with the organizational strategy and trying to identify issues and opportunities. They also want to ensure that the prioritization of projects is done correctly so that the right information system, the best information systems are done first so the organization can succeed much better. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of outsourcing? Well, there's a lot of both, right? So you have to learn how to deal with outsourcing can be a great boon for your company, both in reducing your risk and with improving the level of expertise you can get that you may not have internal to the business. However, you have to be very careful about outsourcing sometimes too much. Now, some businesses decide, I don't care about outsourcing this. This is the direction we want to go. And so you have companies like General Motors who outsource everything, all their information systems, or companies that outsource the entire business function. So what are your rights and responsibilities? What should be your expectations and your responsibilities? Well, you should expect that you're going to have to know some technology and know how to work with it and work with the information systems department. Right? It's not a silo anymore. Now it's becoming more and more integrated, and it's your job to help with that integration. So know the technology, know how to use it, be willing to work with people to make it even better. And so with that, we're going to stop, and next time we'll pick up talking about security and all the ways that hackers can destroy your business, and then all the ways that we have of protecting against that.